Hi guys, tonight we're stepping quietly into the life of a man whose imagination changed the world in ways no one could have predicted. This is the story of Walt Disney, the dreamer who believed that joy could be drawn by hand, shaped by hope, and shared with millions. In the next moments, we'll drift calmly through the earliest chapters of his life, where small sparks of wonder slowly grew into something extraordinary. But before we begin, for those who enjoy slow, thoughtful stories about legendary figures, hit like, subscribe, and share in the comments which personality or historical figure you'd like me to cover next. And tell me, where are you watching from? I'm always curious to see the different places my viewers are from. Walt Disney's story didn't begin with fame or castles or smiling characters. It began in a simple home in Chicago on a cold December day in 1901. When the winter wind pressed softly against the windows and a newborn child opened his eyes to a world that would one day learn to dream through him. His parents, Elias and Flora, had no idea that their fourth son would grow up to reshape the landscape of entertainment. But even in his early years, something about Walt made him unusually observant, unusually drawn to quiet details that others overlooked. When his family moved to a small farm in Marceline, Missouri, it became the first true canvas of his imagination. Walt spent long afternoons wandering between rows of apple trees, tracing the shadows of barn animals, and listening to the soft hum of the countryside. The slow rhythm of that place, the creaking windmill, the dust stirred by passing trains, the glow of fireflies over the fields, began carving gentle patterns in his memory. Later, he would say that Marceline was where he first learned to love stories, because everything there felt like part of one large living tale. But his childhood wasn't easy. His father was strict, expecting discipline and hard work from a young age, and there were mornings when Walt had to wake before sunrise to help deliver newspapers, with icy wind stinging his cheeks. Yet these early routines, though exhausting, taught him something important: the persistence that would one day carry him through countless failures. At school, teachers noticed he often drifted into his own world, sketching animals, trains, and characters in the margins of his notebooks. He wasn't the top student academically, but he carried a quiet spark, a certain curiosity, as though he could see possibilities hidden behind ordinary things. When he discovered the art of drawing more seriously, it gave him a sense of calm. With every pencil stroke, he felt he could shape the scenes of his life, even when reality felt uncertain. And so, as he grew older, tiny ideas began to form. Soft, dreamlike notions that one day, somehow, pictures might move, characters might speak, and entire worlds might come to life from nothing but imagination. No one in his family understood the depth of these dreams, but Walt carried them gently, like small lanterns in his chest, letting them glow quietly toward a future he couldn't yet see. As Walt moved into his teenage years, life began shifting around him in ways he couldn't control, yet each change seemed to add another quiet layer to the dream he carried. When the Disney family left Marceline and settled in Kansas City, the comforting rhythm of rural life faded into the noise of streetcars, busy intersections, and the steady hum of urban routines. Walt missed the farm, the open fields, and the peacefulness of those early days, but he quickly learned to observe the world with the same thoughtful curiosity he had developed in childhood. Kansas City brought new challenges. Elias Disney purchased a newspaper route there too, and once again Walt found himself waking before dawn, folding papers with chilled fingers and pushing through dark, empty streets while the city slept. These moments were lonely, but they taught him determination and gave him long stretches of time to think. And in those quiet early morning hours, ideas continued to bloom inside him. At school, he discovered drawing classes that helped him shape his imagination more clearly. He practiced every chance he got, sketching classmates, street scenes, and small details from daily life. His teachers noticed his growing talent and encouraged him gently, giving him a sense of validation he didn't often receive at home. More importantly, Walt found a community of other creative students who understood the joy of turning thoughts into images, Around this time, he also developed a fascination with theatre, performance, and the early world of film. He'd mimic comedians, invent simple characters, and experiment with ways to make people laugh. He even painted a set of patriotic posters during World War I, discovering how art could express emotion and inspire others. Still, his relationship with his father remained complicated. Elias believed in hard work above all else, and didn't quite understand his son's artistic ambitions. Yet Walt, quietly but firmly, kept following the path that felt true to him. When he reached the age of 16, he felt a strong pull to contribute to something larger than himself. He tried to join the army during the war but was denied for being too young, so he found another way. He joined the Red Cross Ambulance Corps by adjusting his birth certificate. It was a bold decision, one that showed the beginnings of his lifelong willingness to take risks. Serving overseas in France, Walt found moments of solitude that shaped him deeply. Between duties, he would sketch the ruined streets, the uniforms, the makeshift camps, finding small pieces of calm amidst the aftermath of conflict. The world felt bigger, more complex, and filled with possibilities. And somewhere in those months abroad, a clearer vision began to form. When he returned home, he would try to make a life out of drawing, not just as a hobby, but as his true calling. He didn't know how or where to begin, but he carried a quiet certainty in his heart, a soft sense that his imagination was leading him towards something meaningful, something no one around him yet understood. When Walt returned from France, the world felt different, quieter in some ways, but also filled with new currents of opportunity. He carried with him not only a worn sketchbook full of drawings, but a growing belief that art could be more than a pastime. It could be his way of building a life that felt meaningful. Kansas City welcomed him back with familiar streets, but now he saw them through a new lens, noticing how people moved, how storefront lights reflected on sidewalks, and how small moments of everyday life could be transformed into stories. He began searching for any job that would let him draw, no matter how modest. Eventually he found work at the Pesman Rubin Commercial Art Studio, creating simple advertisements and catalogue illustrations. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough to give him a foothold. More importantly, it was where he met Ubiworks, a young artist whose skill and creativity matched Walt's ambition. The two became close collaborators, sensing almost immediately that together they could build something bigger than either of them could alone. Their partnership grew into a small shared dream, to create moving illustrations that could make people feel something special. Walt was fascinated by the early experiments in animation he saw in local theatres. Simple drawings that flickered across the screen, capturing attention with a kind of magic he couldn't ignore. He started learning everything he could, studying the mechanics of movement, experimenting with techniques, and piecing together the fundamentals of this emerging art form. Soon, with youthful optimism and a willingness to take risks, he founded his first company, Laughogram Films. Working out of a small office that often grew cold in the winter and unbearably hot in the summer, Walt recruited a team of young, enthusiastic artists. They created short cartoons inspired by fairy tales and everyday humour. The pay was inconsistent, the deadlines were chaotic, and the equipment was second-hand. But the atmosphere buzzed with creativity. Everyone believed they were at the beginning of something extraordinary. Walt, always dreaming ahead, wanted to create longer, more ambitious pieces, stories that blended charm, humour, and heart. But the business side of things proved more difficult. Laughogram struggled financially. Walt skipped meals to keep the studio running, hoping that success was just around the corner. Though the team produced charming work, the company's debts continued to pile up, until eventually the studio was forced to close. It was a painful moment, one of the first major setbacks of his life, but it didn't extinguish the light inside him. If anything, it clarified his path. He realized he would have to go somewhere bigger, somewhere bursting with opportunity, a place where ideas could grow quickly and take on new shapes. And so, with barely any money, carrying only a cardboard suitcase, a few clothes, and a single reel of film featuring a character named Alice, who wandered between live action and animation, Walt boarded a train heading west. He had never been to California, but something in him felt certain that this was where his dreams would either take flight or fade away. As the train rumbled across miles of open land, Walt stared out at the passing horizon, holding tightly to the hope that the next chapter of his life would be the one where everything finally began to bloom. When Walt arrived in California, the sunlight felt different, warmer, softer, full of the kind of promise he'd been searching for since the early days in Marceline. Los Angeles in the 1920s was a city still discovering itself, buzzing with new studios, aspiring actors, and endless creative experiments. Walt stepped onto the platform with almost no money in his pocket, but with a quiet confidence that his ideas might finally find the space they needed to grow. At first, he planned only to visit family, but the energy of the city pulled him in. He began sending letters to film distributors, offering his services, showing them the Alice reel he had carried from Kansas City. It was unusual, this blend of live action and animation, and although most people didn't quite understand it, one distributor, Margaret Winkler, saw potential. She offered him a contract to create a series of Alice comedies, giving Walt his first real foothold in Hollywood. With this opportunity in hand, Walt reached out to Ubby Works, asking him to join him in California. Ub agreed, and soon the two were reunited, working out of a small office above a real estate agency. They named their new studio the Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio. The space was cramped, the equipment was simple, and the deadlines were tight, but the project brought Walt a renewed sense of hope. For the first time in a long while, he felt that his determination was beginning to lead somewhere solid. The Alice series became moderately successful, enough to keep the studio afloat and allow Walt to hone his storytelling style. But even as production continued, he found himself dreaming of new characters, animated ones who could exist fully within their own world, unaffected by live-action limitations. This dream led him to create a cheerful, energetic rabbit named Oswald. With Ub's exceptional drawing skills and Walt's ability to shape personality and humour, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit quickly gained popularity. The series was fresh, charming, and appealing to audiences across the country. But just as the studio began to feel stable, Walt faced one of the hardest lessons of his career. Travelling to New York to negotiate better terms with his distributor, he discovered that the rights to Oswald didn't belong to him. They belonged entirely to the distributor. Worse yet, many of his animators had been persuaded to leave Disney and join a rival studio. The character he had imagined, the team he had built, and the sense of security he had worked so hard to create was suddenly taken from him. For a moment, everything seemed to collapse. Sitting alone in a hotel room, Walt felt the weight of disappointment settling heavily onto his shoulders, but somewhere beneath the discouragement something deeper stirred. An instinct that he couldn't give up, not after coming this far. On the train ride back to California, instead of sinking into defeat, he began sketching small ideas in the margins of a notepad. Round shapes, expressive eyes, simple lines that could move with personality and life. By the time the train reached Los Angeles, a new character had been born, one who would soon change everything. Walt didn't yet know just how far this little idea would take him, but he felt a spark returning, glowing steadily, asking him to try again. The newly imagined character began as just a few simple circles on a page, but something about him felt alive in a way Walt hadn't experienced before. He and Urbayurks refined the sketch late into the evenings, testing different ears, different noses, little adjustments that gradually shaped a figure full of warmth and curiosity. Eventually they settled on a small, cheerful mouse with an unmistakable smile and a sense of optimism that felt almost like a reflection of Walt himself. They named him Mickey. At first, the idea seemed almost too simple, just a mouse with gloves, big shoes, and a hopeful expression. But Walt believed that if a character had a strong personality, if he moved with sincerity and charm, audiences would connect with him. And so they began working on their first Mickey Mouse cartoon, Plain Crazy, animated quietly in the corner of their modest studio. They hoped to show it to distributors, but no one expressed interest. The second attempt, The Galloping Gaucho met the same fate, yet Walt refused to let discouragement settle in. Around this time, sound technology was emerging in film, and Walt saw something others hadn't fully realised yet. Combining animation with synchronized sound could make characters feel more alive than ever before. His team was hesitant. Sound film was new, untested, and expensive. But Walt insisted it was the future. With nearly all the money the studio had, they produced a third Mickey Mouse short, Steamboat Willie, this time with synchronized audio, carefully timed to every movement. As they tested the sound in the tiny projection room, watching Mickey tap his foot in perfect rhythm with the beat, Walt felt a surge of excitement, as if he were witnessing the very beginning of something completely new. When the cartoon premiered in New York in 1928, the audience reacted exactly as Walt had hoped, and more. People laughed, clapped and cheered, delighted by the playful harmony between animation and sound. Mickey was an instant success, capturing hearts with his enthusiasm, courage, and gentle humour. Suddenly the Disney studio was no longer a small, struggling operation. It was becoming a rising force in the animation world. But success didn't mean things slowed down. Walt began pushing his team to explore deeper emotional expression, smoother movement, and richer storytelling. He introduced new characters like Minnie Mouse, Goofy, and Donald Duck, each one carrying its own distinctive personality. The studio grew busier, filled with artists who believed they were shaping the future of entertainment. Walt walked through the rooms with quiet focus, observing each desk, offering suggestions, encouraging experimentation, always dreaming bigger than the day before. As Mickey's popularity soared, Walt felt grateful, but also restless. He recognized that audiences were ready for animation to evolve again, to expand beyond short comedic sketches and into something larger, something that could touch emotions in a way cartoons had never done before. And so, late at night, when the studio lights dimmed and the streets outside grew silent, he would sit alone, imagining a future where animated characters could carry full stories, where music, colour and movement could blend into a long unfolding dream. The idea felt daring, almost impossible, but it glowed so clearly in his mind that he couldn't ignore it. Little by little, a new vision began forming, one that would once again redefine everything he thought animation could be. The idea that began to take shape in Walt's mind during those quiet late-night moments was unlike anything the animation world had seen before. He imagined a feature-length animated film, something bold, immersive, emotional, and rich with character. It would be a story that didn't rely on quick gags or simple laughs, but instead carried the audience through a full journey, just like live-action cinema. Many people around him doubted the idea immediately. A long cartoon. They said audiences would grow tired, their eyes would strain, the novelty would wear off. Some even called it Disney's folly, a reckless dream that would drain the studio's money and perhaps ruin everything they had built. But Walt felt an unshakable certainty inside him, the same quiet clarity he'd felt when he first imagined Mickey. He believed that if the characters behaved truthfully, if the music blended seamlessly with emotion, and if the animation captured humanity with sincerity, people would forget they were watching drawings. They would feel something real. And so he began shaping the film that would eventually become Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. To bring his vision to life, he introduced new artistic techniques, encouraging his team to study real human movement, practice expression through subtle gestures, and experiment with lighting and shadow in ways animation had never attempted. He pushed for the creation of the multiplane camera, a device that allowed layered artwork to move independently, giving depth to scenes and making the world feel three-dimensional. Every step was ambitious, complicated, and expensive. The studio poured resources into the project, building new facilities, hiring more artists, and conducting endless training sessions. Walt, with his characteristic mix of calm encouragement and fierce determination, guided his animators through each challenge, reminding them that they were doing something unprecedented. Progress was slow but filled with breakthroughs. The dwarfs developed unique personalities, each moving with distinct rhythm and emotion. Snow White, animated with careful study of human actors, became the most realistic cartoon character ever attempted. The backgrounds took on a fairy tale glow, soft and inviting as though lit by moonlight. Despite the growing excitement, financial pressure mounted. Costs kept rising far beyond initial estimates. Walt's brother Roy, who handled business matters, stressed the risks, worried that one misstep could collapse the entire company. But Walt stood firm. He believed wholeheartedly that audiences would respond, because he knew what it felt like to need stories that offered hope, warmth, and a gentle escape from the world. In the final months of production, the studio worked tirelessly. Artists fell asleep at their desks. Animators spent hours refining tiny details, adjusting the blink of an eye or the sway of a lantern to make the world feel alive. Walt reviewed everything with quiet intensity, often pacing behind animators with his hands clasped, imagining how each scene would touch viewers' hearts. When the film was finally completed, Walt arranged a test screening for friends and family of the studio. As the lights dimmed and the story unfolded, the room grew silent, not with boredom, but with emotion. People laughed, cried, gasped softly. When the film ended, the audience erupted into applause. In that moment, Walt realized his wild idea had worked. Animation had crossed into a new realm, proving that imagination, when nurtured with persistence and sincerity, could bloom into something truly timeless. When Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs premiered at the Carthay Circle Theatre in December 1937, the audience's reaction went far beyond what Walt had dared to hope for. People were enchanted, captivated not just by the artistry, but by the emotion woven through every scene. They laughed with the dwarfs, felt fear in the dark forest, and even wiped away tears during the film's most tender moments. For the first time, an animated feature proved it could move people as deeply as any live-action drama. Critics praised it as a triumph, a miracle of imagination, and newspapers across the country marvelled at how a cartoon could feel so real. Walt, sitting quietly in the theatre as the applause echoed around him, felt a warmth that spread through his chest, relief, pride, and a gentle sense of validation. He had followed his instinct, even when nearly everyone said it couldn't be done, and now he saw that the world was ready for stories told through animation in ways no one had tried before. The success gave the studio new momentum. Suddenly, animators had the resources to explore ideas that once seemed impossible. Walt expanded the team, bringing in talented artists from across the country, each one eager to learn from a place that was quickly becoming the centre of animated innovation. The studio grounds grew busier, filled with the soft scratch of pencils, the clicking of cameras, and the murmured conversations of people shaping scenes frame by frame. With a newfound confidence, Walt moved immediately into new projects. Pinocchio, Fantasia, and Bambi each carried their own challenges, pushing animation into deeper artistic waters. Walt encouraged experimentation at every turn. Rich colour palettes, expressive character animation, music-driven storytelling, even abstract visual sequences that felt more like dreams than films. Some of these early projects faced difficulties. Pinocchio and Fantasia struggled financially due to the impact of World War II limiting international distribution. Despite this, Walt refused to retreat. He believed that artistic ambition mattered, even if immediate success didn't follow. During this period, he also became fascinated with nature, taking his team on observation trips to study animals, light, and movement. He wanted every leaf, every flutter of a wing, every shift in a character's gaze to feel truthful. In meetings, he often closed his eyes while listening to musical pieces or watching early animation tests, imagining how audiences would feel in the darkened theatre. He wasn't just making films, he was building experiences. The pressure of maintaining the studio's success weighed on him. though he kept those worries mostly to himself. At home, his wife Lillian noticed how he carried stress quietly, sometimes waking in the night with thoughts of unfinished scenes or financial concerns. Yet each morning he returned to the studio with the same calm determination, driven by a belief that imagination was worth fighting for. He encouraged his team to keep exploring, to keep reaching beyond what they thought possible. Even in the hardest moments, Walt kept his focus on the horizon, on the stories still waiting to be told and the characters who had not yet stepped onto the screen. It was this forward-looking mindset, steady and hopeful, that continued shaping the studio's identity as a place where creativity could grow without limits. As the 1940s unfolded, the world around Walt changed rapidly, and the studio he had built with such care found itself navigating challenges that no one had anticipated. The outbreak of World War II affected nearly every aspect of the business. Overseas markets closed, reducing the income that had supported ambitious projects like Fantasia and Pinocchio. Many employees were drafted, and government contracts became essential for keeping the studio afloat. Walt adapted quickly, shifting focus toward training films, educational shorts, and morale-boosting pieces requested by the US military. Though these works lacked the artistic freedom he cherished, he approached them with the same quiet discipline, determined to protect the studio and the people who depended on it. Inside the growing Disney campus in Burbank, life continued with a mixture of tension and creativity. Animators worked at their desks under bright lamps, sketching soldiers, diagrams, and instructional sequences instead of fairy tale characters. Walt walked the halls with thoughtful eyes, offering feedback, reminding everyone that this period was temporary, and that their true creative work would continue when the world steadied again. Still, the pressure wore on him. The rapid expansion of the studio in earlier years had created financial strain, and the wartime shift left little room for artistic adventures. Walt felt a weight he couldn't always express, a quiet exhaustion that settled into his shoulders. Yet even during this challenging time, seeds of future successes were quietly taking root. He began exploring the idea of package films, shorter segments combined into full features, to keep animation alive without the overwhelming cost of a single long story. These films, like Make Mine Music and Saludos Amigos, kept the spirit of the studio intact and allowed animators to experiment with new styles. Walt also travelled to South America at the government's request, hoping to strengthen cultural connections between nations. The trip inspired colourful new projects and offered him a rare chance to step away from daily worries. He absorbed the vibrant art styles, music, and landscapes, returning home with fresh ideas that would influence future creations. Despite the difficulties, Walt continued nurturing a sense of community among his employees. He introduced sports teams, dances, art classes, and studio gatherings to bring a feeling of togetherness to the long, uncertain days. Some nights, he stayed late in his office, sketching quietly, imagining the worlds he would one day return to with full creative force. As the war slowly approached its end, Walt began feeling the first hints of optimism returning. He knew the studio had survived one of its hardest tests, and though it had changed, it remained standing, full of artists ready to dream again. In the quiet moments after meetings or during solitary walks around the studio grounds, he allowed himself to think of new possibilities. He thought of stories that could be revisited, characters who hadn't yet come to life, and ideas far larger than anything he had attempted before. Little by little, the spark of imagination that had dimmed under the strain of war began to glow again, steady and warm, guiding him toward a new chapter waiting just beyond the horizon. When the war finally ended, the world and the Disney studio felt as though it was breathing again for the first time in years. The air seemed lighter, the days a little brighter, and Walt sensed an opening, a chance to return to the kind of storytelling that first inspired him. Yet rebuilding wasn't simple. The studio faced significant debt, and audiences had grown used to shorter, more practical films during wartime. Walt knew he had to find a way to reconnect people with animation's emotional power, to remind them why they once fell in love with characters who lived only on paper. Slowly, he began guiding the studio back toward full-length features. Cinderella became the centerpiece of this new chapter, a story of hope, resilience, and quiet magic. Walt felt drawn to it, perhaps because he understood its deeper message. Even when life feels heavy, a gentle dream can still carry someone forward. Production began cautiously, with careful budgeting and a sense of determination layered beneath every scene. Artists returned to their desks with renewed purpose, studying gestures, experimenting with backgrounds, and capturing emotions through subtle expression. Walt walked through the animation rooms every day, sometimes offering small notes, sometimes simply watching, absorbing the energy that had once defined the studio. Slowly, the project grew into something beautiful. When Cinderella premiered in 1950, audiences embraced it wholeheartedly. It felt like a return to warmth, a reminder of Disney's special ability to create comfort through imagination. The success pulled the studio out of financial danger and reopened doors to new creative possibilities. With stability restored, Walt began pushing in multiple directions at once. He oversaw the development of Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, and Lady and the Tramp, each film offering its own challenges and wonders. He encouraged his team to explore bold colour palettes, stylized backgrounds, and more expressive character animation. Yet even with these successes, Walt felt a familiar restlessness. He had spent decades shaping worlds on screen, but now he began imagining something different, something people could walk into, touch, and experience with all their senses. The idea grew slowly at first, sparked by afternoons spent with his daughters at amusement parks. He loved watching them ride carousels and laugh at simple attractions, but he noticed the parks felt chaotic, dirty, unfocused. He imagined a place where families could escape together into carefully crafted worlds, where visitors would feel safe, welcomed, and surrounded by beauty. A place where the magic of his films could be experienced not just through a screen, but in real life. He started sketching rough concepts in his spare moments, idealized main streets, riverboats, fantasy castles. The more he sketched, the clearer the vision became. It wasn't just a park, it was a storybook people could step inside. Yet when he mentioned the idea to others, many doubted him. They said it was too big, too expensive, too unrealistic. But Walt, as always, wasn't deterred. In this new dream, he saw the same spark he'd felt with Mickey, with Snow White, and with every creative leap before. And quietly, steadily, he began preparing to bring it to life, knowing it would become one of the most ambitious projects he had ever dared to imagine. Walt's idea for a place where families could share wonder together continued to grow inside him, taking on clearer shape with every passing month. He called it Disneyland long before it existed, the name itself becoming a kind of gentle promise he repeated to himself during long drives or quiet evenings at home. He didn't yet know how he would build it or where the money would come from, but the vision felt so vivid, so full of possibility, that he couldn't let it go. He imagined children wandering through scenes from their favourite stories, parents discovering calm paths lined with flowers, and visitors stepping into lands filled with adventure, fantasy, and nostalgia. Walt began studying amusement parks across the country, not for inspiration but to understand what he didn't want. He saw rusty rides, peeling paint, and a lack of care in the details. He wanted the opposite, a place spotless, organised, and overflowing with heart. He believed that if everything felt intentional, every bench, every tree, every sound, then people would trust the magic of the world he created. To bring the project to life, Walt formed a small development team called W.Ed Enterprises, named after his initials, Walter Elias Disney. He filled it with artists, architects, and model builders who could translate his dreams into practical designs. They crafted miniature buildings, tiny rivers, and early versions of what would become iconic spaces, Walt often bent over the models for long stretches, gently adjusting pieces with his fingertips as if arranging a living diorama. Financing the park, however, became the greatest challenge. Banks didn't understand his vision, and potential investors saw too much risk. So Walt turned to an unexpected source: television. He approached ABC with a proposal for a weekly show that would introduce viewers to stories, characters, and behind-the-scenes glimpses of the future park. In exchange, ABC would help fund Disneyland's construction. It was one of the boldest deals of his career, and it worked. Through television, Walt connected directly with families across America. They invited him into their living rooms each week, hearing him speak softly about imagination, adventure, and the coming dream he was building. The show became a success, and the excitement surrounding Disneyland grew before the park even existed. As construction began in Anaheim, California, Walt visited the site constantly. He walked the dusty paths, studied blueprints under the sun, and imagined crowds wandering through spaces that were still only wooden frames and piles of soil. Workers noticed how he quietly focused on small details, asking about the angle of a roof, the texture of a walkway, the colour of a lamppost. His perfectionism wasn't harsh. It was gentle, rooted in wanting families to feel cared for the moment they stepped inside. The project moved quickly, almost too quickly, with deadlines pressing and obstacles appearing at every turn. Soil issues, budget overruns, design changes, they all arrived in waves. Yet Walt remained calm, carrying the same quiet determination that had guided him since his Kansas City days. Even when exhaustion settled into his features, he came back each morning with hope, ready to push Disneyland one step closer to becoming real. And as opening day approached, he knew something profound was about to take shape. A place built not only from steel and wood, but from decades of dreams that had finally found a home. As the summer of 1955 approached, Disneyland neared completion, though at times it felt as though the entire project was racing against an invisible clock. Crews worked day and night to finish buildings, paint facades, and plant thousands of trees and flowers across the sprawling grounds. Walt visited constantly, wearing the same calm smile even as he navigated a maze of unfinished sidewalks, construction noise, and last-minute adjustments. Workers often said they could feel his presence before they saw him. There was a quiet focus that seemed to follow him everywhere. He walked slowly through each land: Main Street, Adventureland, Fantasyland, Frontierland, imagining how families would wander through them, what sounds they would hear, and how the air would feel when the gates finally opened. Despite his calm demeanour, the challenges were overwhelming. Attractions broke down during testing, plumbing was incomplete in some areas, and the intense California heat dried the new asphalt so quickly that it softened under the sun. Still, Walt encouraged everyone to keep going, reminding them through gentle words and steady determination that they were building something historic. July 17th, 1955, arrived with more anticipation than anyone expected. Disneyland's opening day was broadcast live on national television, drawing millions of viewers who had followed Walt's weekly program. Inside the park, however, chaos unfolded quietly beneath the smiles. Counterfeit tickets allowed far more people inside than planned, water fountains didn't work due to plumbing shortages, and the heat caused the freshly laid asphalt to soften under the weight of the crowd's shoes. Rides faced technical issues, food supplies ran low, and the pressure was immense. Yet through all of it, Walt remained composed. He walked through the bustling park with a gentle expression, greeting families, shaking hands, and offering quiet encouragement to overwhelmed employees. He understood that perfection would come with time. What mattered most was that Disneyland was finally real, a place built from imagination, effort, and unwavering belief. By the end of opening day, despite the challenges, visitors left with smiles, and children tugged their parents toward the exit gates, already asking when they could return. Walt watched them go with a soft, tired satisfaction. In the following months, Disneyland grew quickly into a beloved destination. Walt spent countless hours refining details, adding new attractions, adjusting pathways, planting more trees, and improving the visitor experience. He often arrived before sunrise, walking the empty park while morning light illuminated Sleeping Beauty Castle. These quiet moments became his favourite, offering him a rare sense of peace. As the park blossomed, so did Walt's imagination. He began thinking of future lands, new technologies, and ways to blend storytelling with innovation. Disneyland was not the end of a dream. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would continue to grow as long as he had ideas to guide it. And for Walt, the ideas never stopped coming. Even as Disneyland settled into its place as a beloved destination, Walt found himself dreaming further, seeing possibilities that stretched beyond the park's gates. While most people viewed Disneyland as an achievement complete in itself, Walt saw it as a foundation, something living, growing, always capable of becoming more. He spent long evenings in his office above Main Street, looking out over the park after closing hours, watching lights flicker out one by one while ideas drifted through his mind like soft glowing sparks. During these quiet moments, he began imagining new attractions that could push the limits of what storytelling and technology could accomplish. He encouraged his team at WED Enterprises to experiment with new forms of mechanical animation, creations that could move, blink, gesture, and speak with lifelike grace. These early audio animatronics would one day shape attractions like the Enchanted Tiki Room and Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. Walt believed these innovations could offer guests an entirely new kind of magic, something different from film or traditional rides. He wanted characters to feel truly present, as though they existed in the same world as the visitors who came to see them. At the same time, television continued to be an important part of Walt's connection with the public. Each week, families across the country tuned in to hear him talk about dreams, stories, and the ever-growing world of Disneyland. His gentle storytelling style and calm presence created a sense of trust. He felt like a friendly guide leading viewers through adventures both real and imagined. It was during this period that Walt also began developing some of his most iconic cinematic projects. Sleeping Beauty, 101 Dalmatians, and The Sword in the Stone each took shape under his watch, reflecting the studio's blend of evolving style and timeless charm. Yet behind the creative success, Walt faced increasingly heavy responsibilities. Managing the park, supervising film production, overseeing WED Enterprises, and maintaining a constant public presence left him with little time to rest. Friends and colleagues noticed moments when he seemed tired, his energy stretched thin by the demands of his expanding vision. But Walt rarely slowed down. His imagination kept pulling him forward, toward new possibilities, new stories, new ways to bring people joy. He had always believed that creativity was a responsibility as much as a gift, and he carried that belief with quiet determination. In moments of stress, he found refuge in simple routines, walking the park before opening, sitting with a cup of coffee on a quiet bench, or watching enchanted guests drift through fantasy land. These scenes reminded him why he worked so tirelessly. They filled him with a warm sense of purpose that eased the weight on his shoulders. As the 1960s approached, Walt sensed that the world was changing rapidly. Technology was accelerating, cities were growing, and society buzzed with new ideas about the future. And once again, he found his thoughts drifting toward a dream larger than anything he had built so far. A dream that lived somewhere beyond Disneyland, waiting for him to begin shaping it into reality. As the new decade unfolded, Walt's imagination drifted further into the possibilities of the future. He had always been fascinated by progress, by how cities changed, how technology evolved, and how people adapted to shifting worlds. But now his curiosity turned into something deeper. He began imagining a place that could reflect the promise of tomorrow, a living community shaped by innovation, cooperation, and thoughtful design. This idea would eventually grow into one of his most ambitious dreams, Epcot. At first, Epcot lived only in sketches scattered across Walt's desk, circles representing neighbourhoods, lines tracing transportation systems, and clusters of buildings arranged into carefully balanced spaces. Walt didn't picture a traditional theme park. Instead, he envisioned a functioning city where people lived, worked, and learned in harmony. A place constantly updated with the latest breakthroughs, where new technologies could be tested in real time. He believed that the future should feel hopeful, organised, and filled with opportunity, and he wanted Epcot to embody that hope. While Epcot occupied his thoughts, Walt continued guiding his teams through film projects and park expansions. Mary Poppins emerged as one of the studio's most celebrated achievements, blending live action and animation in ways that brought fresh delight to audiences. At Disneyland, attractions like the Matterhorn bobsleds and the monorail pushed engineering boundaries, transforming classic ride concepts into something boldly modern. Walt loved standing near the monorail platform, watching its sleek shape glide overhead. To him, it wasn't just transportation, it was a symbol of what tomorrow could feel like. Even as his dreams grew larger, Walt remained deeply connected to simple human moments. He enjoyed spending time with his grandkids, telling them stories, pushing them on swings in the backyard, and taking them to Disneyland for quiet rides before the park opened. These gentle family moments softened the intensity of his daily responsibilities, reminding him that all his work, every film, every attraction, every idea, had always been about bringing joy to others. Still, the strain of constant creativity and management began to show. Walt pushed himself harder than ever, juggling studio decisions, park development, television commitments, and planning sessions for Epcot. Some colleagues noticed him catching his breath more often, or pressing a hand to his chest during stressful moments. But Walt brushed off concerns, insisting that there was too much to do, too many ideas waiting to be realised. He believed the world was moving quickly, and he felt a quiet urgency to keep pace with it. At meetings, he often spoke with a calm but passionate tone, describing Epcot not just as a project but as a responsibility, something that could show society a better way forward. His team listened with admiration, aware that they were witnessing the final evolution of Walt's visionary spirit. Outside the studio and the park, Walt's world remained filled with inspiration. Architecture, city planning, new materials, and scientific breakthroughs fascinated him. He clipped articles, watched documentaries, and filled notebooks with thoughts about transportation systems, environmental design, and public spaces. These ideas formed a steady rhythm in his mind, carrying him deeper into the dream of creating something that could outlive him, a place where imagination and innovation could touch everyday life. As the months passed, Walt continued shaping Epcot with the same quiet determination that had guided him through every chapter of his career. He didn't yet know how much time he had left, but he felt the dream growing stronger, illuminated from within by the same spark that once brought Mickey Mouse, Snow White, and Disneyland into the world. The deeper Walt ventured into the ideas behind Epcot, the more the project became a reflection of everything he believed about the future. He imagined a place built not from fantasy, but from possibility, a community where people could experience new technologies firsthand, where clean transportation systems flowed smoothly, and where neighbourhoods were designed with comfort, safety, and connection at their core. Walt spoke often about how cities had grown crowded and chaotic, how pollution and poor planning had shaped daily life in ways that made people feel rushed and overwhelmed. Epcot, he insisted, would be different. It would be a living demonstration of progress, a model for how urban spaces could evolve with care and clarity. Meetings often took place in rooms filled with blueprints, models, and sketches spread across long tables. Walt moved slowly around them, explaining how transportation lanes should curve, how green spaces should connect to neighbourhoods, and how a central hub, clean, bright and filled with activity, would serve as the heart of the city. His team listened quietly, taking notes and asking questions, trying to keep up with the steady flow of ideas. Even as Epcot consumed much of his attention, Walt remained closely involved with Disneyland. He oversaw the development of the Carousel of Progress, the People Mover, and early concepts for Pirates of the Caribbean. Each project carried his signature blend of optimism and detail, reinforcing his belief that innovation should always feel inviting and human. But those close to him noticed that Walt was quieter than before, still warm, still determined, but more reflective. He spent more time talking about the future, about the importance of preparing younger generations to dream boldly, and about how imagination needed to be protected and encouraged in a changing world. As construction for new projects accelerated, Walt visited the studio less frequently. He often stayed in conference rooms or his WED office, surrounded by Epcot materials. Some nights, long after others had gone home, he stayed behind, reviewing models under the soft light of a desk lamp. He would lean over the miniature buildings, studying them with a mixture of focus and tenderness, as though seeing in them the beginnings of a world yet to come. Despite his busy schedule, he continued to appear on television with the same calm charm that audiences loved. Viewers at home had no idea how much he was juggling behind the scenes. To them, he remained the friendly guide, the storyteller who introduced new ideas with gentle confidence. In quieter moments, Walt spoke to those close to him about the responsibility of dreaming. He believed that imagination wasn't simply entertainment. It was a way of shaping lives, inspiring hope, and showing people that the world could always become better than it was. Epcot, in many ways, was the purest expression of that belief. It wasn't a fantasy, it was a promise. And even as the pace of his work grew heavier, Walt carried that promise with unwavering dedication, determined to lay the foundation for a future he hoped others would one day continue. As 1966 approached, Walt's days became a careful balance of creativity, responsibility, and an inner urgency that few around him fully understood. Epcot continued to expand in his mind, its details becoming clearer with every meeting and pencil sketch. He spoke about it not as a concept, but as something inevitable, something the world needed. He often described Epcot as a blueprint for tomorrow, a place where people could see solutions rather than problems, possibilities rather than limitations. Walt was energized by the idea, yet physically he began to slow. Colleagues noticed he paused more often while walking, catching his breath before continuing a thought. Still, he brushed aside concerns, always focusing on what still needed to be built. Whenever he spoke about Epcot, his voice carried the same gentle conviction it always had, a quiet certainty that imagination could improve everyday life. Even as Epcot grew into the centre of his attention, Walt kept guiding projects already in motion. Pirates of the Caribbean neared completion, blending lifelike animatronics with atmospheric storytelling. Walt reviewed every detail, from the flicker of lanterns to the sway of pirate ships, ensuring the attraction carried the immersive charm he envisioned. He also oversaw final touches on the Haunted Mansion and continued to nurture the development of new animation techniques at the studio. His schedule remained full, and though he moved more slowly, his mind seemed more active than ever. At home, his family watched him with tender concern. He still spent time with his grandchildren, telling them stories, drawing quick sketches and sharing quiet moments in the garden. Those times brought him comfort, grounding him in the simple joys that had fueled his dreams since childhood. But even during these peaceful moments, he often drifted into thought, his gaze softening as he imagined Epcot's shimmering walkways and futuristic skyline. By late autumn, Walt began preparing to present the Epcot concept publicly. He recorded a detailed film explaining the city's design, its transportation systems, its central hub, its constantly evolving technology, speaking with calm assurance about how it could shape the future. The film captured his vision with clarity and warmth, showing not just a project, but a dream he believed in with all his heart. Those closest to him noticed that he was quieter after the filming, more contemplative. He spent long hours looking over blueprints, tracing pathways with his finger, imagining how families would live and move through the city. Around the studio some sensed a shift, something gentle, almost bittersweet, though they couldn't quite place it. Walt continued working, continued dreaming, continued guiding his teams exactly as he always had. There was no sign that he intended to slow down. If anything, his imagination seemed to reach further, stretching past the boundaries of his own lifetime. He still believed that tomorrow could be brighter than today, and he worked with quiet determination to leave behind the clearest map he could for those who would carry his dreams forward. In the final weeks of 1966, Walt continued moving through his days with the same gentle steadiness that had guided him throughout his life, though those closest to him sensed something quieter beneath the surface. He still arrived at meetings with sketches tucked under his arm, still spoke passionately about Epcot, still reviewed attraction designs with careful eyes, but there was a softness to him, as if he were holding something unspoken. Doctors had discovered a serious health issue that required immediate attention, and Walt, ever private, kept the news close. He underwent treatment quietly, assuring his family that everything would be fine. Even in the hospital, he asked for drawings, blueprints, and models to be brought to him. Nurses watched as he traced transportation routes with his finger, explaining to visitors how the People Mover concept would fit into Epcot's layout. He spoke about the city as though he were already walking through it, picturing families moving effortlessly along elevated tracks, children exploring green courtyards, and communities built around harmony rather than chaos. His brother Roy visited often, sitting beside him while Walt described new ideas with a gentle enthusiasm. They'd shared a lifetime of challenges and triumphs, financial uncertainties, creative breakthroughs, sleepless nights, and unforgettable victories. In these quiet conversations, Roy sensed how deeply Epcot lived inside Walt, how much of his heart was woven into the dream. Still, he encouraged Walt to rest, reminding him softly that the studio and the park could manage without him for a while. Walt would smile at that, shaking his head just a little, insisting that there was still too much left to plan. Even as his strength wavered, his imagination did not. He envisioned new details almost constantly: transportation loops, weatherproof walkways, modern homes, shared community centres filled with light. He spoke about Epcot not as an experiment, but as a gift for the future, a blueprint the world could follow, even long after he was gone. In his quieter moments, Walt thought about the arc of his life: the boy sketching animals in Marceline, the young man struggling in Kansas City, the dreamer creating characters from scraps of hope, the builder turning orange groves into Disneyland. Every dream had felt impossible at first, yet each had taken shape through persistence and belief. He hoped Epcot would follow the same path, growing into something real, meaningful, and enduring. His family stayed by his side, offering comfort, recalling stories, and creating moments of warmth around him. The studio continued its work, unaware that the man who had guided them for decades was nearing the end of his journey. And through it all, Walt held on to his vision of tomorrow, clear, bright, filled with possibility, trusting that the spark he'd carried for so long would continue to shine through the people who believed in the magic of imagination. In early December, Walt's condition grew more fragile, yet his mind remained anchored to the dreams he had nurtured for decades. He continued asking for updates from the studio, requesting sketches to be brought to him, and listening carefully as designers explained their latest progress. Even confined to a hospital room, he led conversations with a calm, thoughtful tone, imagining new possibilities with the same clarity that had guided him since the days of Mickey. The hospital ceiling tiles often served as his makeshift canvas. Using them like a grid, he traced out Epcot's layout in the air, describing where transportation routes should curve, how residential areas might blend with green spaces, and where the central hub would rise like a symbol of unity. Visitors watched quietly as he gestured toward the ceiling, explaining ideas with precision, as though the city already existed above him. His brother Roy sat with him frequently, listening to these descriptions with a mixture of admiration and tenderness. Roy understood better than anyone how Walt's imagination worked, how a simple idea could grow into something extraordinary if given space to breathe. During these final conversations, Walt spoke not about accomplishments or regrets, but about possibilities. He imagined Epcot as a living project, one that would evolve long after he was gone, shaped by future generations who shared his belief in progress. To the end, he talked about tomorrow. Colleagues who visited were struck by his gentleness. Even as his strength faded, he offered encouragement, asked about their families, and reminded them to keep dreaming boldly. He carried an unshakable faith in people, their creativity, their kindness, their ability to build something meaningful together. Walt never viewed imagination as escapism. To him, it was a tool for improving the world. In these quiet days, he also thought often of his family. His daughters recalled how he smiled when they entered the room, asking about their lives, listening to their stories, and offering soft words that carried decades of love. With his grandchildren, he remained playful, still finding joy in small jokes and quick sketches, even if his hands moved more slowly. As Christmas approached, the studio continued its preparations for upcoming attractions, unaware that Walt's condition had become critical. Designers discussed plans for Tomorrowland updates, new technologies, and rides still in early development. They assumed Walt would soon return, ready to guide them through the next creative leap. On December 15th, 1966, Walt Disney passed away, leaving behind a world forever changed by the dreams he had brought to life. News of his death spread quietly at first, then with a wave of emotion across the country. People mourned not just the man, but the sense of wonder he represented, the belief that imagination mattered, that stories could bring people together, and that joy could be built into the very fabric of daily life. In the days that followed, those who worked alongside him felt an emptiness settle over the studio. Yet they also felt something else, a responsibility. Walt had left behind ideas too powerful to fade, dreams too meaningful to be forgotten. And so, through their grief, they began looking toward the future, toward the worlds he hoped they would continue building, toward the spark he had carried so faithfully for so many years. In the weeks following Walt's passing, a quiet stillness settled over the studio and the park, an emotional pause that felt almost unreal to those who had spent years moving at the rhythm of his imagination. Artists walked the hallways with softer steps, passing rooms where Walt had once stood with sketches in hand, offering encouragement or sharing a new idea. Animators left small drawings on his empty desk, gentle tributes to the man who had taught them to see possibility in every frame. At Disneyland, cast members gathered before opening to reflect together. Standing in the early morning light beneath the castle, he had dreamed into existence. Guests who visited the park sensed a shift in the air, noticing the flags at half-staff and the subtle quiet that hung over Main Street. Many paused near the firehouse window, where a small lamp glowed, kept burning in honor of Walt's memory, a symbol of the light he'd given to the world. For the Disney family, the days were filled with bittersweet memories. They spoke of his laughter, his gentle jokes, his handwritten notes on napkins and scraps of paper. His daughters remembered the way he told stories at bedtime, weaving characters and adventures from thin air. His brother Roy, who had been at his side since their earliest days in Kansas City, felt the loss most deeply. Walt had always been the dreamer, and Roy the one who shaped those dreams into practical paths. Now Roy stood before the future with a quiet determination to carry out the work Walt had left unfinished. Above all, there was Epcot. Walt's final vision had become his most ambitious, and he had spoken about it so often, so passionately, that everyone knew it couldn't simply disappear with him. In the months that followed, Roy took on the responsibility of guiding the project forward. Though quieter and more reserved than Walt, he felt a profound duty to honour his brother's legacy. He met with designers, reviewed sketches, and studied the film Walt had recorded to present the concept. When he watched it again for the first time after Walt's death, Roy felt as though his brother was still in the room, explaining, guiding, dreaming. At the same time, the studio continued developing films and attractions Walt had set in motion. The Jungle Book, one of the last animated features he had worked on, became a heartfelt tribute, cherished by audiences who felt its warmth and optimism. The Pirates of the Caribbean attraction, nearing completion, carried Walt's unmistakable spirit of adventure. Every lantern glow, every ripple of water, every playful scene bore the imprint of his imagination. Employees often said that even though Walt was gone, his presence could be felt everywhere. In the laughter of children stepping off a ride, in the gentle music drifting through Fantasyland, in the sketches pinned to bulletin boards, and in the dreams still growing in the hearts of the people who had learned from him. As spring approached, the studio began to regain its rhythm, not by moving on, but by moving forward with the lessons Walt had left behind. People worked with renewed purpose, aware that they were now carrying a torch passed to them with trust. Through sorrow, a sense of unity formed, pulling everyone together. Walt's legacy was no longer just his life's work. It had become a collective responsibility. And as they turned toward the next chapter, those who had known him best understood one thing with absolute clarity. Walt's dream was far from over. As 1967 unfolded, the company slowly stepped into a new chapter, one shaped by grief, determination, and the quiet promise to honour Walt's vision. Roy Disney, carrying the weight of both brotherly love and responsibility, became the steady guiding force the studio needed. He was older now, near retirement age, yet he stepped forward with a resolve that surprised even those closest to him. Roy had always worked behind the scenes, letting Walt shine as the storyteller, the dreamer, the voice of imagination. Now he found himself in the role Walt once held, leading teams, making decisions, and reassuring thousands of employees who were still adjusting to the absence of the man who had inspired them for so long. More than anything, Roy focused on Epcot. It had been Walt's final dream, and Roy vowed that it would become reality. He spoke with a calm but firm tone during meetings, reminding the team that Epcot was not simply a project, it was a promise. Designers brought forward updated models, transportation plans, and architectural sketches. Many had trouble imagining the project without Walt's voice guiding each detail, but Roy insisted they continue exactly as Walt had instructed. "We will finish this," he said quietly, because that's what he wanted. Meanwhile, Disneyland continued to thrive, drawing visitors from around the world. The Pirates of the Caribbean attraction opened to overwhelming praise. Its detailed sets, lifelike animatronics, and immersive atmosphere instantly made it one of the most beloved rides in the park. Guests didn't know it was the last attraction Walt personally supervised, but those who built it felt his presence in every scene. Not long after, the Haunted Mansion followed, enchanting visitors with its inventive blend of spooky elegance and gentle humour. To the outside world, it looked as though Disney magic continued effortlessly, but inside the company, every success carried a bittersweet echo. Teams often paused to wonder how Walt might have adjusted a scene or improved a character's movement. His influence guided them like a soft memory, steadying their hands when doubt crept in. Films also continued to emerge from the studio. The Jungle Book, released in 1967, became a heartwarming tribute to Walt's spirit. Its playful characters and joyful music connected deeply with audiences, offering comfort to those still mourning his loss. Critics praised the film's warmth, noting how it carried the unmistakable charm that had defined Walt's storytelling for decades. Through the year, Roy spent more time in Florida, overseeing the early phases of what was now officially called the Florida Project. Land was cleared, foundations were laid, and the first outlines of Walt Disney World began to form in the vast open fields. Roy walked the site with a gentle determination, imagining the day families would stroll through the resort, unaware of the decades of dreams that had led to its creation. Though the work was demanding, Roy felt closer to his brother with every decision he made. As summer gave way to fall, the studio and the park found a new rhythm. Creativity blossomed again, not because Walt's absence had faded, but because his influence remained deeply rooted in every corner of the company. People who had once looked to Walt now looked to each other, forming a collaborative strength shaped by shared purpose. They weren't just preserving his legacy, they were living it. And with Epcot slowly taking shape, guided by the steady hand of the brother Walt had trusted most, the future of his dreams continued to rise, steady and bright, against the horizon. As 1968 and the years that followed unfolded, Roy continued carrying Walt's vision with a quiet strength that surprised even those who had known him the longest. Though he had planned to retire before Walt passed, he now set that idea aside completely. He felt a deep responsibility, not just to the company, but to his brother's memory. Each morning he arrived early, reviewing construction reports from Florida, approving designs, and meeting with teams who were shaping the massive project that would one day become Walt Disney World. The Florida heat, the sheer scale of the land, and the ambitious timelines all posed challenges, yet Roy approached each obstacle with calm persistence. He often walked the developing site alongside engineers, pointing out details Walt would have cared about. The castle's placement, the curves of walkways, the way guests would first experience Main Street, all these choices mattered, and Roy treated them with the same reverence Walt had shown for Disneyland's earlier sketches. At the same time, the studio in California continued building momentum. New animators joined, blending fresh ideas with techniques developed during Walt's lifetime. Films like The Aristocats and The Rescuers were shaped during this era, carrying forward the warmth and gentle humour that audiences associated with Disney stories. Though the company was evolving, the spirit of Walt's storytelling remained its foundation. Throughout this period, Roy made sure to stay connected to the people who worked at both the studio and the park. He visited Disneyland often, walking the grounds with caretakers, talking with ride operators, and listening to cast members who had once received encouragement directly from Walt. Many employees said they could feel both brothers' presence when Roy visited, Walt's imagination and Roy's steady guidance blending together like two halves of a single vision. Meanwhile, construction in Florida accelerated. Roads were paved, hotels began to rise, and the centerpiece, Magic Kingdom, started to take shape. Seeing the castle tower above the construction site filled Roy with a quiet, emotional pride. He knew Walt had imagined this moment, even if he never lived to see it. As the project neared completion, Roy made an important decision. The resort would not simply be called Disney World. It would be named Walt Disney World, in honor of the man whose dreams had made it possible. He announced this with a voice that wavered slightly, revealing the depth of love and respect he carried for his brother. Opening day approached rapidly, and Roy, despite his age, travelled constantly between California and Florida, ensuring every detail was ready. Cast members trained, attractions tested, and preparations unfolded with an almost reverent focus. The vision that had begun as sketches on Walt's hospital ceiling was becoming a living place, full of colour, movement, and joy. As the finishing touches were placed, Roy stood quietly on the castle balcony one evening, looking out over the nearly completed park. The light shimmered, the pathways curved gracefully, and the air carried the unmistakable feeling of a dream turning real. For a moment, Roy felt that Walt was standing beside him, seeing everything he had imagined take form, and with that thought, he knew the promise he'd made was almost fulfilled. On October 1st, 1971, Walt Disney World opened its gates to the public, and with it, Roy's promise to his brother was finally fulfilled. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the Magic Kingdom as guests streamed through the entrance, their faces bright with anticipation. The smell of fresh paint lingered in the air, flowers bloomed along carefully arranged pathways, and music drifted gently across the park. Though the crowd saw only the beauty of the finished dream, those who worked behind the scenes felt something deeper, a mixture of triumph, emotion, and quiet remembrance. Roy, now in his 70s, moved through the park with deliberate steps, greeting cast members, shaking hands, and offering words of gratitude. He had always been the quieter Disney brother, the one who supported from the background, but on this day he stood in the centre of the dream Walt had imagined. During the dedication ceremony, Roy spoke with a calm steadiness that carried a hint of trembling warmth. He introduced the resort not simply as an achievement, but as a tribute. "We call it Walt Disney World," he said, "because Walt Disney World is the place Walt wanted to build." His words settled over the crowd like a blessing. For many employees, it was the moment they finally allowed themselves to feel everything they had held inside since 1966. The grief, the gratitude, and the pride in what they had created together. As guests wandered through the freshly opened park, riding the Jungle Cruise, floating through It's a Small World, and marvelling at the castle, Roy watched quietly. He smiled whenever he saw a child tug their parent's hand, or a family pause to take a photo beneath the shimmering turrets. These simple moments reminded him exactly why Walt had dreamed of a place like this. The park was more than attractions and buildings. It was a vessel for happiness. The months that followed were busy and fulfilling for Roy. Walt Disney World flourished, drawing more guests than expected and receiving praise for its beauty and innovation. Roy oversaw improvements, listened to feedback, and continued refining the experience just as Walt would have done. But the long years of work, responsibility, and emotional weight had taken a toll. By December of that same year, Roy's health began to decline. He spent time at home with family, surrounded by the people he loved most. Even during his final days, Roy asked often about the park, wanting to know how it was running, how guests were enjoying it, and what new ideas the team was exploring. On December 20th, 1971, just a few months after the grand opening, Roy Disney passed away peacefully. His departure marked the end of an era, closing the chapter that he and Walt had written together over a lifetime. When news spread through the company, employees paused in their work, feeling a deep, quiet sadness. Many said that without Roy, Walt's dreams might never have become reality. In a way, Roy had been the guardian of the magic. At Walt Disney World, cast members lowered flags and walked the park with a reflective calm. Some stood before the castle, imagining how proud Walt and Roy would have been to see families laughing and exploring the place they had built. The brothers who once sketched ideas in tiny rooms and struggled through early failures had created something that would endure for generations. And though both were gone, their dreams lingered, alive in every smile, every ride, every spark of wonder that lit up the park each day. With both Walt and Roy gone, the company entered a period of reflection, unsure at first how to move forward without the two brothers who had shaped every decision from the beginning. But even in their absence, the foundation they had built was strong, filled with talented artists, engineers, storytellers, and leaders who had spent years learning from their vision. In the early 1970s, a quiet determination settled over the studio and the parks. People understood that the responsibility of carrying the Disney legacy had now passed to them. They approached it with humility, knowing that each project needed to honour the spirit Walt had left behind: optimism, creativity, and a belief in making the world a little brighter. Walt Disney World continued to grow, becoming a place families eagerly travelled to from across the country. New attractions opened, more resorts were planned, and the park's popularity surged. Even though Epcot's original concept, a functioning experimental city, was too ambitious for the company to build exactly as Walt had envisioned, his ideas still guided their thinking. Designers revisited his notes, his sketches, and the film he recorded, searching for a way to translate his dream into something achievable. At the studio, the animation department entered a transitional phase. Many of the legendary animators Walt had trained were nearing retirement, and younger artists were beginning to take their place. Films like Robin Hood and The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh continued the tradition of gentle storytelling, while the company experimented with new techniques and styles. Leaders recognized that Disney had to adapt to a changing world without losing its heart. They emphasized teamwork more than ever before, encouraging collaboration between departments that had once operated separately. Imagineers, animators, musicians, writers, and engineers worked together to keep innovation alive. They knew they were walking a delicate line, protecting the traditions Walt had created while also preparing the company for a future he could only imagine. Internally, the memory of Walt and Roy remained a guiding presence. Their portraits hung in meeting rooms, their early sketches were preserved like treasures, and employees often quoted Walt's favourite phrases during brainstorming sessions. One of those phrases became almost like a compass for the company: keep moving forward. As the decade progressed, momentum gradually returned. New technologies emerged, new opportunities appeared, and the next generation of creative minds began shaping ideas that would carry Disney into an era of unexpected growth. And though the brothers were no longer there to guide them, the people who remained understood something profound. Walt's dream didn't end with his life. It lived on in the stories being told, the children laughing in the parks, and the belief, still shining quietly in the hearts of everyone at the company, that imagination could change the world. As the 1980s approached, the Disney company found itself standing at a crossroads, a place where tradition met uncertainty, and the future depended on bold choices. Many of the original animators and Imagineers who had worked directly with Walt were retiring, leaving behind a younger generation eager but unsure how to fill such enormous shoes. The studio's animated films, once the heartbeat of the company, began to struggle. Projects took longer, budgets grew tighter, and audiences shifted their attention to new forms of entertainment. For the first time, people wondered whether Disney's era of groundbreaking animation might be fading. Yet within this uncertainty, sparks of creativity continued to glow. The studio hired fresh talent, young animators who had grown up watching Walt's classics and carried a deep respect for the storytelling traditions he had established. They worked tirelessly, studying the old films frame by frame, learning not just how to animate, but how to breathe emotion into every character. Meanwhile, Imagineering pushed forward with one of the biggest projects in the company's history, Epcot Center. It wouldn't be the living city Walt originally envisioned, but it would still carry the spirit of his dream, a place where innovation, culture, and education blended into a new kind of theme park experience. By 1982, Epcot Center opened its gates, revealing two massive sections: Future World, celebrating technology, and World Showcase, honoring global cultures. Visitors marveled at Spaceship Earth, Journey into Imagination, and pavilions that explored energy, oceans, communication, and transportation. Though different from Walt's original idea, Epcot reflected his belief in progress and the potential of human creativity. As Epcot flourished, the animation studio slowly regained its footing. New leaders stepped in, challenging outdated processes and encouraging bold experimentation. They pushed animators to blend traditional techniques with emerging technologies, sparking a quiet revolution behind the scenes. By the mid-1980s, a renewed sense of purpose began to spread, hinting at something just over the horizon. Disney Channel launched, expanding the company's reach into homes across America. Imagineers developed new attractions, including iconic collaborations with filmmakers like George Lucas. Each step forward felt like a thread connecting the company's future to Walt's original spirit of discovery. And through all these changes, one idea remained constant in the minds of those who worked there. Walt had always believed that the company must evolve, stay curious, and embrace the unknown. His absence was still felt, but his philosophy continued to guide decisions, gently reminding everyone that the Disney magic wasn't confined to a single era. It was a living force, growing and adapting through every new challenge. As the decade drew to a close, the company stood on the edge of a new dawn. The young animators who had once struggled to find their direction were now preparing projects that would soon transform Disney's future. Though none of them knew it yet, they were about to ignite a renaissance, one that would revive the artistry, the wonder, and the storytelling heart that had always defined Walt Disney's legacy. As the late 1980s arrived, the Disney Animation Studio stood on the brink of a transformation no one could have predicted. After years of uncertainty and shifting direction, a new creative pulse began flowing through the halls, quiet at first, then growing stronger with each project. Young animators, many of whom had been hired straight out of art school, were now stepping into leadership roles. They were inspired by the legacy of Walt's early films, but were determined to push animation into a modern era. These artists gathered late into the nights, sketching, debating, laughing, and reimagining what Disney's storytelling could become. Technology was evolving too. New computer-assisted tools allowed animators to experiment with camera angles, lighting, and movement in ways Walt could only have dreamed of. Yet the heart of the work remained hand-drawn, every frame crafted with emotion and intention. This combination of innovation and tradition lit the spark that would soon reignite the magic of Disney animation. In 1989, The Little Mermaid premiered, marking a turning point that swept through the company like a warm tide. Audiences fell in love with Ariel's longing, the vibrant underwater world, and the unforgettable music. It felt like the dawn of something new, a return to the emotional depth and charm that had defined Walt's classics. The success energized the entire studio. Animators danced in the hallways, composers felt revived, story artists began pushing their ideas further. And the film's triumph carried the company confidently into what the world would later call the Disney Renaissance. Over the next few years, this creative wave produced a series of beloved films: Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King. Each one carried its own soul, blending humour, heart, and music in a way that connected deeply with audiences around the world. Beauty and the Beast even earned a historic Academy Award nomination for Best Picture, something no animated film had achieved before. Meanwhile, the parks continued to evolve. New attractions opened in Florida, Tokyo Disneyland expanded Disney's global presence, and work began on Disney MGM Studios, celebrating the craft of filmmaking. Imagineers embraced groundbreaking technologies, building immersive worlds that stretched the limits of engineering and storytelling. Throughout all of this growth, employees often reflected on Walt's influence. They felt it in the animation rooms where character tests were pinned to walls, in the Imagineering labs where prototypes whirred and sparked, and in the park pathways where children laughed with the same wonder Walt had hoped to inspire. Leaders frequently reminded their teams that Walt had believed in exploring new frontiers without fear, an idea that resonated strongly as the company reached heights not seen since his lifetime. By the mid-1990s, Disney had become a global force again, its films cherished by a new generation, and its parks thriving with innovation. Those who had once questioned the company's future now watched in awe as creativity bloomed across every corner of the brand. And though Walt had not lived to witness this renaissance, his spirit was undeniably present. In every story that moved hearts, in every dream that took flight, and in every artist who dared to imagine the impossible just a little more boldly. As the 1990s progressed, the momentum of the Disney Renaissance continued, carrying the company to new creative heights. Each year brought another ambitious project, another leap forward in storytelling and innovation. Animators felt a sense of pride and energy that echoed the studio's earliest days, when Walt himself pushed boundaries with every new idea. The release of The Lion King in 1994 marked a pinnacle moment. Audiences around the world were captivated by its sweeping landscapes, emotional depth, and unforgettable music. No one had expected an original story inspired by nature and mythology to resonate so powerfully, yet it became one of the most successful animated films ever created. Those who worked on it often said they felt Walt's spirit in the process, the courage to tackle something different, the belief that a story could touch people deeply, even without a familiar fairy tale framework. Behind the scenes, another revolution was taking shape. Pixar, a small studio Disney had partnered with, was experimenting with fully computer-generated animation. Walt had always embraced technology as a friend to creativity, and it seemed fitting that the next great leap would emerge from a spirit of innovation he championed. In 1995, Toy Story premiered, the world's first fully computer-animated feature film. It stunned audiences with its heartfelt narrative and groundbreaking visuals. For Disney, it signaled a new frontier, a reminder that imagination could always find new tools to express itself. This partnership with Pixar blossomed into one of the most successful collaborations in film history. At the same time, Disney expanded its presence globally. Disneyland Paris opened in 1992, bringing the company's magic to Europe. The park faced challenges at first, but over time it grew into a beloved destination, proving once again that Walt's belief in international storytelling had enduring strength. Back in the United States, the company diversified into television, publishing, and live-action filmmaking. The Disney Channel grew rapidly. Original shows filled homes with stories that carried the studio's signature warmth, and Broadway adaptations like Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King brought Disney's animated worlds to the stage with breathtaking creativity. As the decade unfolded, the company grew larger than anyone could have imagined in Walt's lifetime. Yet through all the expansion, the heart of the brand, its dedication to joy, imagination, and hope remained constant. Employees across animation, Imagineering, television, and parks kept Walt's philosophies at the center of their work. Innovate boldly, treat the audience with respect, and hold on to the belief that stories can make life brighter. Although the company now operated on a global scale, with divisions Walt never lived to see, many who worked there still felt close to him. They passed his quotes through hallways, retold stories of his creative risks, and kept small reminders of his legacy on their desks. Even new employees who had never known him personally learned quickly that Walt wasn't just a founder, he was a guiding star. As the world prepared to enter a new millennium, Disney stood stronger than ever, carried forward by creators who embraced the same dream Walt once followed: to bring happiness into the world, one story, one character, one spark of imagination at a time. As the 2000s began, Disney entered a new era shaped by rapid technological change, shifting audience tastes, and the continued evolution of storytelling. While the studio had grown into a global powerhouse, the heart of its mission remained tied to the values Walt had championed decades earlier: creativity, optimism, and the belief that stories could inspire people of all ages. The early years of the decade brought both triumphs and challenges. Traditional hand-drawn animation, once the foundation of the company, struggled to compete with the increasing popularity of computer-generated films. Even though movies like The Emperor's New Groove and Lilo and Stitch offered fresh humor and heartfelt narratives, the industry was clearly changing. The company faced an important crossroads: evolve with the times or risk falling behind. As always, innovation became the path forward. Disney strengthened its partnership with Pixar, whose films, Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, and The Incredibles, captured audiences with their emotional depth and groundbreaking animation. These stories felt modern yet timeless, blending humor, heart, and imagination in a way Walt would have admired. The creative success of Pixar revitalized the spirit of animated storytelling across the entire company. Meanwhile, Disney parks around the world expanded with ambitious new projects. Disney California Adventure opened in 2001, bringing fresh experiences to the West Coast. Tokyo Disney Sea debuted the same year, instantly earning praise for its stunning design and immersive detail. Imagineers poured their creativity into every ride, show, and themed area, pushing boundaries much as Walt had done in his day. Each new attraction reflected the same philosophy he had instilled long ago. Every detail matters, because every detail helps build a world where guests can believe in magic. During this period, Disney also acquired new properties, strengthening its presence in television and film. The purchase of ABC and ESPN expanded the company's influence beyond entertainment alone, weaving Disney into the fabric of everyday life for millions of households. Though these expansions were far removed from the early days of hand-drawn sketches and tiny offices, they were rooted in Walt's original idea that imagination should reach as many people as possible. Throughout the decade, the company returned again and again to the question, what would Walt do today? Executives, Imagineers, and animators often paused to reflect on how he embraced new technology, welcomed collaboration, and encouraged bold creative risks. That spirit guided them through decisions that shaped the modern Disney identity. By the mid-2000s, discussions intensified about the future of the animation studio. Some wondered whether hand-drawn animation still had a place, while others argued that technology should be used not to replace tradition, but to enhance it. These conversations echoed Walt's timeless belief that innovation and artistry were meant to work together. And as new voices stepped forward to lead the next generation of storytellers, the company prepared for another wave of transformation, one that would carry Walt's legacy into a world far more connected, digital, and global than he could ever have imagined, yet still hungry for the same timeless magic he always believed in. By the late 2000s, Disney stood on the edge of another turning point, one that would redefine the company for the decades ahead. Technology was evolving at breathtaking speed, storytelling mediums were expanding, and audiences were consuming entertainment in entirely new ways. Through all this change, the question remained the same. How could Disney honor its past while continuing to grow into the future? The answer came through bold decisions and a renewed commitment to innovation. In 2006, Disney acquired Pixar, bringing two creative forces under one roof. Many saw this as a natural union. Pixar had been deeply influenced by Walt's philosophies from the beginning. John Lasseter, one of Pixar's founders, often spoke about how Walt's dedication to technological advancement and emotional storytelling shaped their approach to filmmaking. Under this new partnership, the animation studio thrived. Films like Ratatouille, Wall-E, and Up pushed the boundaries of what animated stories could express. They were filled with the same emotional sincerity Walt championed, stories about hope, perseverance, curiosity, and the simple courage to dream. Meanwhile, Disney's hand-drawn animation studio found renewed life. The Princess and the Frog, released in 2009, marked a heartfelt return to traditional 2D animation. Though the industry continued shifting towards CG, the film served as a reminder that artistry came in many forms, and each had its place in Disney's legacy. Beyond the world of animation, the company expanded in ways that reflected Walt's belief that storytelling had no limits. In 2009, Disney acquired Marvel, bringing a universe of heroes into the Disney family. This decision reshaped the entertainment landscape, paving the way for cinematic storytelling on a scale never seen before. Walt had always believed in the power of heroic narratives, and Marvel offered endless opportunities to explore themes of courage, identity, and hope. In the parks, Imagineers embraced ever more advanced technology. Attractions like Expedition Everest, the Finding Nemo musical, and updated nighttime shows transformed guest experiences, blending engineering, artistry, and emotional storytelling. Around the world, Disney parks continued to flourish, each one a living canvas where millions of visitors experienced the magic Walt had dreamed of so many years earlier. The company faced challenges too: economic shifts, creative risks, and the growing pressure to remain relevant in a rapidly changing world. But through each trial, leaders returned to the same guiding principles Walt had lived by. Keep moving forward, embrace new ideas, and never lose sight of the joy stories can bring. As the decade closed, Disney stood stronger than ever, but not because it had avoided change. It was strong because it had changed with purpose, following Walt's belief that imagination must evolve to stay alive. And though the world had become far more complex and global than Walt could have imagined, the core of his dream remained unmistakable, shining steadily through every corner of the company. As the 2010s arrived, Disney entered one of the most transformative eras in its history, an era shaped by daring acquisitions, groundbreaking films, and technological advancements that pushed storytelling to new heights. Through every milestone, the company continued reflecting the same guiding light Walt had established decades earlier: the belief that imagination, when nurtured with heart and innovation, could create worlds that stayed with people forever. In 2012, Disney made one of its most significant moves by acquiring Lucasfilm, bringing the legendary Star Wars universe under its banner. This decision sent waves of excitement throughout the entertainment world. Walt had always admired bold, adventurous narratives, and now Disney had the opportunity to continue one of the most beloved sagas ever created. New films entered production, each crafted with reverence for George Lucas's original vision, but infused with the emotional warmth and optimism that defined Disney storytelling. Meanwhile, the Disney Animation Studio experienced another creative resurgence. Films like Frozen, Moana, Zootopia, and Big Hero 6 captivated audiences globally, blending rich character development with themes of courage, identity, and compassion. Frozen, in particular, became a phenomenon, echoing the way earlier classics had touched hearts across generations. Songwriters, animators, and story artists often reflected on how Walt's legacy of emotional storytelling guided their work, even when creating worlds he never had the chance to imagine. Pixar continued to thrive too, crafting stories that blended heartfelt emotion with stunning visual innovation. Movies like Inside Out, Coco, and Toy Story 3 reminded audiences that animated films could explore complex emotions while still offering warmth and hope. Many filmmakers behind these projects often said that they felt Walt's presence in the studio's core belief, that storytelling could illuminate the human experience in gentle, meaningful ways. The theme parks also evolved dramatically during this decade. New lands, such as Star Wars, Galaxy's Edge, and Pandora, the world of Avatar, brought immersive, cinematic environments to life with unprecedented detail. Guests could pilot the Millennium Falcon, roam the bioluminescent forests of Pandora, or wander through reimagined fantasy lands around the world. Imagineers embraced next-generation technology, using animatronics, projection mapping, and interactive experiences to blur the line between fiction and reality. Many said they felt they were building the kind of immersive worlds Walt dreamed of when he first created Disneyland, a place where storytelling surrounded you at every turn. Disney expanded its presence in media as well. The launch of Disney Plus in 2019 brought the company's vast library into homes worldwide, allowing families to access classics, new films, and original series all in one place. It marked a new chapter, one rooted in Walt's lifelong belief that technology could help stories reach more people. Through it all, the company faced challenges, market changes, creative risks, and shifting cultural expectations. But at every step, leaders and creators asked themselves a question Walt once posed: how can we make people happy? That simple, powerful idea continued to shape decisions across animation, film, television, and theme parks. And as the decade drew to a close, it became clear that Disney had not only preserved Walt's legacy, it had expanded it, carrying his dream into a future filled with more stories, more voices, and more magic than he could have imagined, yet fully in harmony with the spirit of joy he dedicated his life to creating. As the 2020s began, Disney stepped into a world more connected and more uncertain than ever before. Global events reshaped travel, entertainment, and daily life, causing theme parks to close temporarily and film productions to pause. For a company built on bringing people together, These challenges felt especially heavy. Yet even in the most difficult moments, Disney returned to the philosophy Walt had carried from his earliest days. When the world feels dark, offer light. When people are unsure, offer hope. And when circumstances change, keep moving forward with imagination. During this time, the company leaned on storytelling more than ever. Disney Plus, which had launched only months earlier, became a lifeline, bringing comfort, nostalgia, and new stories into millions of homes. Families rewatched classics, children discovered animated films for the first time, and new series expanded beloved universes. The Mandalorian, WandaVision, and Loki drew global audiences, blending cinematic storytelling with the intimacy of television. In many ways, it echoed Walt's own use of early television, connecting directly with people in their living rooms. Meanwhile, the parks prepared for a future filled with renewed joy. Imagineers worked quietly during closures, upgrading attractions and developing new ones. When the gates reopened, guests returned with tears, gratitude, and a profound appreciation for the magic they had missed. Cast members said those early reopening days felt like living inside Walt's original dream. Families laughing together, children seeing characters again, and people rediscovering the comfort of shared wonder. Technological innovations continued shaping the company's future. Advanced animatronics brought characters to life with unprecedented realism. Virtual reality and augmented reality blended digital and physical worlds. New ride systems made attractions more immersive than anything built before. Disney's filmmakers also adapted, exploring different styles and expanding representation in their stories. Films like Encanto, Soul, and Raya and the Last Dragon celebrated diverse cultures and emotional journeys, offering audiences new perspectives while staying true to the core themes Walt believed in: hope, connection, and the transformative power of imagination. Throughout the decade, the company strengthened its commitment to global storytelling. International creators brought fresh voices and ideas, shaping projects that reflected a wider world than the one Walt knew. And yet, despite the vast changes, his influence remained unmistakable. Imagineers still quoted him during brainstorming sessions. Animators kept drawings of Mickey pinned above their desks, reminding them of the spark that started it all. Leaders invoked Walt's philosophy when facing difficult decisions: to innovate fearlessly, to honour the audience, and to build with heart. Even new employees, many born long after Walt's passing, felt his presence woven into the culture. They learned quickly that working at Disney wasn't just a job. It was taking part in one long, continuous story shaped by generations of dreamers. And as the world moved deeper into the decade, Disney continued evolving, guided by the same idea that had propelled a young animator from Marceline to global legend. Imagination is endless, and its greatest purpose is to bring people happiness. As Disney moved further into the 2020s and beyond, the company entered a period defined by both reflection and forward vision, a balance Walt himself had mastered throughout his life. Those who carried his legacy understood that the strength of Disney's future depended not just on new technology or global expansion, but on staying true to the emotional heartbeat that had guided the company from the beginning. In boardrooms, creative studios, animation labs, and Imagineering workshops, teams constantly asked themselves the same question Walt had once repeated during difficult times: what story are we trying to tell? That question served as a compass, reminding everyone that whether a project involved films, attractions, streaming series, or digital innovations, storytelling was the core. Technology became a tool, not the destination. Disney continued investing in immersive experiences that blurred the boundaries between fantasy and the real world. Attractions like Star Wars, Rise of the Resistance, and Guardians of the Galaxy, Cosmic Rewind pushed engineering to breathtaking limits, placing guests inside adventures once thought impossible. New lands and resorts emerged across the globe, each shaped with the same attention to detail Walt had brought to Main Street, USA. decades after his passing, Imagineers still walked parks at dawn, studying lighting, pathways, and soundscapes, guided by the idea that every detail contributed to the story being told. Animation evolved too. Disney and Pixar artists experimented with new visual styles, blending hand-drawn textures with cutting-edge digital tools. Films explored themes of identity, community, and emotional depth, echoing Walt's belief that stories should resonate across generations. And as new filmmakers from around the world joined the ranks, the studio's storytelling became more diverse, inclusive, and globally connected, an expansion of Walt's original dream of touching hearts everywhere. Through streaming platforms, Disney expanded its reach even further, offering instant access to stories that could comfort, inspire, or simply entertain. Families across different continents watched the same films together, shared characters, and passed traditions from one generation to the next. In this digital age, Disney found a new kind of unity, one that transcended borders and time zones. Yet the company also took time to honour its history. Archives were preserved, restored, and shared with fans eager to understand how Walt's worlds were built. Documentaries, museum exhibits, and anniversary celebrations reminded people that behind every film, every ride, and every character was a story of determination, passion, and quiet belief. Internally, employees continued to feel Walt's presence as more than memory. His ideas lived in the values they practiced: creativity with purpose, innovation with heart, optimism in the face of challenge. When new cast members joined, mentors often told them that working at Disney meant becoming a storyteller, no matter their job title. And as long as people continued dreaming, the company would keep growing, changing, and reaching for new horizons. Standing in the parks at night, long after guests had gone home, Imagineers sometimes paused to look up at the castle lights shimmering against the sky. In those quiet moments, many felt the same gentle truth. Walt Disney had built much more than films or attractions. He had built a legacy of hope, one that lived in every smile shared between families, every spark of imagination in a child's eyes, and every dream that dared to grow. And though decades had passed since Walt first set those dreams in motion, they continued travelling outward, touching lives, reminding the world that happiness, when nurtured with courage and creativity, can echo across generations.